Greetings, System Failure listeners. Nate and Brian here with episode 93 of the System Failure Podcast. How are you doing this week, Brian?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's a rainy Saturday. It's Father's Day weekend. We're excited. Summer is officially here, although it does seem like every single weekend is rainy. I do not know how the weather knows that it's the weekend and it needs to be rainy, but we've got that weather pattern once again after a pretty nice week.
I think it's our reptilian overlords.
Yeah, it must be that cloud seeding or the HARP system. And there's a lot of if you look it up and pop open the hood and look under into the engine bay, like on the internet, there's like a lot of weird technology out there that actually does impact the weather. I'll never forget visiting Serbia and being near the airport in Novi Sad, and there was one afternoon there was like these explosions, and it was explained to me that those are the anti-hail rockets that they fire into the air. Some afternoons they just want to make sure that there's no hail impacting the departing or the landing aircraft. And I was like, anti-hail rockets. It's interesting. It's interesting how people are not aware that we will use aircraft to dump silver iodide into the atmosphere to induce rain, to cause rain clouds to condense and fall as rain. Like, people don't realize that weather control is something that's actually a thing.
Yeah, well, it's been a thing since the 1930s, cloud seeding. And I guess they make it rain like once a week in Saudi Arabia or the UAE or one of those places.
Yeah. I don't know if that's what's responsible for our unfortunate weather pattern, Brian, but we're falling victim to it again. So this week I went back on Reddit. I think about 4 months ago I announced my retirement from Reddit on this podcast. Do you remember that, Brian?
I do.
I was like, I just can't go on there anymore. The discourse is of such a low level that it's like that Mark Twain quote: "If you shouldn't wrestle with pigs. They'll just get you dirty," or something. So he says something like that. I was thinking this week that I would try to promote system failure with some videos, and I thought I was going to use Google's VO3 model. There was this great piece in the Wall Street Journal the week before last where Joanna Stern, the reporter, had done a video about her new robot, that it was her personal assistant, and they used the Google's new VO3 AI text to video or image to video generator. And this generator is wowing everybody because not only can it create the video, but it can make the characters speak. And so in the how-to video, there was the video of how we made this video on the Wall Street Journal. They had Joanna Stern talking and then making her hand gestures into the camera, and then the suite of software that they had used had converted her image of her talking with her hands into a mad scientist who was inventing the robot. So she was saying the mad scientist lines, and they could juxtapose back and forth between Joanna Stern reading the lines of the mad scientist and then the mad scientist reading the lines in his voice. And I was like, this is awesome. We're going to be able to create amazing system failure videos to promote the weekly essays in our podcast. It's going to be amazing. But man, the reality was not nearly as slick as the Wall Street Journal made it seem. The main issue is that whatever you ask it for in plain language, it's going to spit out. If you give it 3 to 4 parameters, give me a video of, 2 lads with microphones and earphones doing a podcast together, and here are the lines, right? It's going to forget, a couple, 3 of those parameters every time. So it really becomes like a dice roll. And even if you pay the heavy $250 monthly subscription fee to VO3, which you can get for half off for a couple months here, even if you pay it, you're still rolling the dice every time you request a video. It's going to have errors. And so it really just seemed more like a scam than an efficient way to make good videos to promote system failure. So earlier this week, I was back to the drawing board, and I was like, well, maybe I should just go on Reddit and just try to have a presence there. The idea would be that you have your place where your podcast and your weekly newsletter, and then you have this other space where you interact with people for free, and maybe you try to interact with people who would be interested in the suite of ideas on offer. But man, I did it for one day. It blew out my attention span. I can't believe it. It really is. I think that of all the horrible addictions, the pornography and the weed and whatever else that's swirling around in our society these days, I think it's the short form video content, and specifically, it's not so much the short form video content. It is the infinite scroll wheel, like the infinite scroll list. It used to be on Google that you would have the first page of search results, and you have to click 2 to get to the second page, right? But any of these short form video, or in the case of Reddit, it's a lot of articles and pictures and things, and a few videos. But it loads the next post, so you're just constantly seeking that next dopamine hit. It really is. I mean, I just really felt it change my brain chemistry in a fundamental fashion on only one day of Reddit jockeying. So I wonder, Brian, how has your battle been going with the infinite scroll wheels? Are they impacting your life?
Man, I had stayed off of Reddit, but then I don't know, it's kind of creeped up again. But it's pretty bad. Like, what you want to do is go see what the shocking opinions are after the latest Joe Rogan podcast.
Yes. Yeah.
But and then I don't know, immediately you have like an emotional reaction to the stupidity, because people will be upset regardless of who Joe Rogan has on.
Yes. Yeah.
And
the most emotionally charged things are the ones that get upvoted. But then you go so you get that spike. You're like, oh, this is an outrageous comment. Only a fool would say this, and then you go through the whatever the emotional processing is of that, and then it's on to the next. Then it's on to the next spike and the next spike, and I end up looking for the spikes and rushing through the reading of the text. I find myself really reading really fast and not fully comprehending everything I'm reading, so I can get to that next dopamine spike. It's just the way that it rewires the brain. I've just really felt it this week. And of course, in order to read text, like most of Reddit is text, you're reading, comments or things people have written. Reading, you kind of have to force yourself to read. You have to. You are acting. It's like you have to force yourself to keep running when you're jogging, and when you're reading, you have to burn a few calories to keep reading, right? You kind of have to, in other words, feed yourself. But with the videos, just play. You don't have to work at all. It just flows right into your consciousness with not a single calorie burnt on your part. And so it just becomes, you can just float from short. I mean, I got to think that, just imagining how the infinite scroll affects my brain on Reddit that's text-based, just a short form video version of that, catastrophe, man. That is just going to hijack your limbic system and send you into a state, man. And then after a few hours, it's like the dopamine's not hitting as hard anymore, and you're scrolling even faster, and then you just really start to feel dopamine out, and I feel like this hollow shell. I just can't. I mean, it's every bit as impactful as like any of these, as like drinking beers or any of these like real chemicals that are supposed to impact your brain. I really think these infinite scrolls are far more sinister than they are given recognition for.
Reddit is bad, okay?
Yes.
Well, I mean, I guess I think the worst part is just the deleterious effect on society in general, or just from the nature of the discourse. It's just so like terrible.
Well, what do you think that is? Is it because there's bots and shills on there for corporations and government agencies and huge think tanks buying up bot farms, and or is it something else?
I don't know, because people will post an opinion and it's like, well, this is beyond stupid. This person must be like a shill. But then you'll click on their account to see, and they seem like a real person. But it's hard to imagine that bots like haven't affected the nature of the discourse one way or another.
The one that makes me crazy is like, well, I guess it looks like Hillary Clinton got more votes than Bernie in the 20 or the 16 primaries. Too bad Bernie couldn't have got more votes. And you're like, isn't like the lawsuit isn't Donna Brazil's book where she came out and admitted to cheating? Isn't the lawsuit where the DNC got sued for this? Isn't all of that stuff like, it might just be that the person typing on the other end just has no idea or has forgotten. Or it might be that it's some kind of a bot trying to manufacture some kind of a consensus. I don't know. So there's a deleterious effect on society. I think it's not just the bots either. I think it's some kind of there is some kind of the lowest common denominator kind of wins the day on Reddit's process going on, even without the bots and the attempts to try to manipulate it.
Well, people do get to gather by their fringe opinions and get a crazy like think tank going on, and then do battle with those ideas. So there's that. So there's like no like normal people on Reddit because everyone's been organized by their insane ideas.
Yeah. Well, I will say this. My Reddit experiment did not yield a flood of new subscribers to System Failure. I think I'm going to have to do my own short-term videos and just put them on all of the short-term video infinite scroll wheels and not look into the horrible eye of Sauron myself. Yeah. I think that's going to have to be the plan.
So yeah, you VO3 was a failure, and then you went to Reddit, which was even worse.
Yeah. I feel like I think Tuesday was my Reddit day. And I feel like I wasted the whole day. But here's the thing about Reddit that drives me crazy is that you actually will learn some interesting pieces. And so I have a nugget that I found on Reddit to bring to your attention, Brian. I don't know if you've heard of this little girl, Samantha Smith. You ever heard of her?
I don't think so.
Oh, yeah. So I didn't know anything about this girl, but I found out about her on Reddit this week. She's a local Mainer, which is why I bring her up.
Okay.
In the late 70s, she was this little girl who wrote a wrote a letter to the premier of the Soviet Union, talking about how she grew up in the Cold War, right? She was like 10 years old, 11 years old, 12 years old, something like that. Little girl writes a cute letter to the premier of the Soviet Union. She's a Mainer from, central Maine. And the premier of the Soviet Union got this letter, and there was this happened in 83, so like the year I was born, so you aren't going to remember this. But yeah, this little girl got invited out to Moscow. She met with the Soviet leaders. It was a big, peace moment. Or a big moment of like maybe when the darkest clouds of the Cold War cleared away for a little bit. You've got this cute little Maine girl and the premier of the Soviet Union talking about how no one wants war and how we have to do better. Great moment. A couple of months later, this little girl and her dad got killed in a mysterious plane crash in Maine. So that's what happened to Samantha Smith. She died up there flying into Bangor Field. I guess their plane ran out of runway or something and crashed in the trees, killed her and killed the little girl and her old man. And so the conspiracy theories swirl that maybe this little girl in her small plane flying back to Maine got taken out because she was, shaking the saber for peace. The opposite of shaking the saber for war. And I guess you wouldn't say shaking the saber for peace, but making noise about how desirable peace is. And she just got snuffed out just randomly after that. I'm sure, just totally an accident. Of course, there is such thing as accidents, and this probably is one. But it's fun that she's from Maine and that there's a conspiracy theory attached. And boy, howdy, doesn't that fit into the news this week with the whole, it just seems like some people want to beat the war drums, even though it's bad for almost everyone. And that's where we're at this week, Brian. It has been another fraught news cycle, hasn't it?
Indeed.
Yeah, so this week we had... so the first thing was that we had the Iran, we had the Donald trying to resurrect the Iran nuclear deal that he backed out of in 2018. Do you remember this? Obviously, in the last thing Obama did before he left office was sign this deal where Iran would agree to limit their nuclear research and their development of possible nuclear warheads, right? And then the Donald came in and ripped up that deal 2 years later,
right?
And now the Donald's trying to get that deal back, but it seems like that was just cover so the Israelis could, launch a strike into Israel and take out some of their top generals and nuclear scientists and some of their nuclear facilities. So that happened as a surprise this week in the midst of renewed rounds of talks with the Iranians.
Well, on Breaking Points, they were theorizing that this whole strike on Iran is so that the Donald can come up with a more favorable, a better deal than the Obama deal. Which I don't know, maybe. I don't know. Maybe so. It seems. It seems like Israel really wants to blow up Iran, and they're really threatened by their nuclear program. Of course, there's articles going back to 1995, talking about how Iran is close to getting a nuclear bomb.
Yeah.
And also Gaddafi gave up his weapons program and was sodomized to death.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. It did not go well for the Libyans giving up their nuclear program. Unfortunately, that's a good point.
Yeah. Anyway, so I don't know. I guess I'm rooting for Iran in this war. I don't know. Obviously, if you're in charge, I'm sure you see the world differently. But why are we supporting preemptive strikes against other countries? This would be supporting Japan in World War II for their preemptive strike for the coming threat of the United States.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we all know that the example of World War II and Neville Chamberlain and Hitler is the only historical example we can ever reference when it comes to looking back at history. And so we know that any hesitation to rush to war is actually a good way to guarantee even more war. So this is what we have to do, right, Brian?
Yeah, we're going to create peace by murdering people.
Yeah. Well, so you had mentioned a second ago that maybe this will fit into some broader political strategy, and that's kind of the other big news going on this weekend is that today and tomorrow is supposed to be the No Kings protests around the country. It's a little confusing. You're protesting someone who's, I think they're protesting the Donald's actions in general, right? It's like no one thinks that the man is a king. He obviously elected, duly elected leader, but that's okay. I just like protests in general.
Yeah, well, there are all these protests going on before this crazy strike, and well, let's see. It's just silly because I guess I just don't feel like the Donald's like more of a king than any other ruling party, but
we just don't like what the Donald's doing. And if we don't, I definitely think that protests are great. But I just have this feeling that the Donald thinks that... I think the Donald's aware that the economic situation is not so good. Right? He's not going to be able to actually get the gas prices, or the egg prices. The economy is bad and likely to be getting worse for regular people as we go along, right?
Well, I guess here's what I'm trying to say, right? Now that the Donald's been elected again, it's like time to burn down the country again. That's what we did back in 2016. And now we're going to protest like the establishment so we can put some Democrat back in there to do nothing, to carry on the status quo.
I'm theorizing that this is not organic like the pink hat pussy riots of 2016, and that trying to make the rioting specifically about the immigration issue. I think that Donald thinks he's got a strong hand to play on the immigration issue, and he wants to drum up. And I think sending the National Guard right into California last weekend probably not necessary, but I think it makes the Donald look like he is strong on an issue that he can actually win on, which is immigration. Right, the crazy immigration situation during Joe Biden's 2020 to 2024 term, wildly unpopular. So I don't know. I think that the Donald wants to really amplify this, whatever opposition he can to the immigration question, and then he can look like a winner in the immigration arena here. I think that's what he's trying to do. So I'm wondering if these protests are quite as organic as their counterparts from 4 years ago. Not sure if they are.
I don't know. I guess the Donald's presidency has basically been a disaster. So maybe like the anti-Donald Trump people have a point there, or certainly we have not gotten any peace in the Middle East or like any Epstein documents released or like anything good that's happened. I guess he's done something on immigration, although there is this question about whether due process is being followed. And I guess there's like a couple examples, or at least like one or something, of people being sent to some giant prison in El Salvador who shouldn't be sent there. Yeah. And I guess that would be pretty upsetting if it happened to me.
Yeah. Well, deporting people is an ugly business. But I think it's a winner for the Donald. I think that may be the one thing where he has 80% of people are going to be like, yeah, we can't just have crazy immigration situation at the southern border like we did for 4 years under Joe Biden. I mean,
I guess to compare this presidency to Biden's, what we got under Biden is like this crazy war in Ukraine. Although I guess Russia technically initiated it. So, but on the other hand, I mean, it seems like there were several off-roads for peace that were intentionally not taken, and that it seems like the administration really wants this proxy war in Ukraine as a way to do battle with Russia.
So Putin sent a note into NATO before the invasion saying, "Hey, look, just promise Ukraine will not become a NATO member. I will not invade." What the guy's name is, Jens, whatever, the guy that was the Secretary General of the UN at the time. You can find his quotes online, laughing about it. They told Putin to get stuffed when he was like, "Yeah, just." And then of course there's the Istanbul thing you're talking about, where both the Ukrainians and the Russians had the framework for an agreement in place, and then the NATO powers sent in Boris Johnson to scuttle the deal so we could make sure that the war in Ukraine continued. So, yeah, like you're saying, there's plenty of off-ramps that have been available for this thing. And that was what we'd hoped, right? I obviously would like to reverse the destruction of the middle class, but neither you nor me nor anyone thought that Donald was going to reverse the demolition of the middle class. But we maybe hope that we might get some America First policies that could possibly save us some money, that could be used here at home and possibly save the lives not just of American service people, but of the civilians that are inevitably going to lose their lives as a result of this. And we've got nothing on the America First front whatsoever. It's been just nonstop saber rattling and excitement on that front since basically day one.
The other thing is this whole crazy Palantir business, right?
Ugh, yeah.
And so there's this idea that like maybe Doge was just this whole like smoke and mirrors thing to like put through like the Palantir program in like, I don't know, because like Peter Thiel, like J.D. Vance is like Peter Thiel's boy. Of course, so is Eric Weinstein and Jesse Michaels, who we find to be endlessly fascinating. But, and I guess what Doge done is somehow like consolidated the information the government has to make like Palantir, which is like this way to track everything we do and give you a social credit score, basically.
I mentioned the Eye of Sauron earlier as a joke about Reddit, but Palantir is the name of the stone that Saruman uses to talk to Sauron in the Lord of the Rings books, right? So that's why Peter Thiel has named his surveillance system Palantir.
Yeah, why would you call it Palantir? You have got to be kidding me.
They have, obviously they don't think much of us.
Can't they at least come up with some kind of euphemism?
Yeah, some kind of one of these Pentagon acronyms, that doesn't really mean anything. Something like that would have been good, but no, Palantir.
Yeah, so I guess it's been a complete disaster.
Yeah. Well, for the second half of this show, I wanted to dive back into the news about the bond markets and the deficits have all taken a backseat to the excitement going on in the Middle East. But for the second half of the show, I got some clips from our main man, Dave Smith, so we'll talk a bit more about this whole business of government deficits and government spending. One of my favorite bailiwicks to get on. But yeah, obviously Doge seems silly when you realize that we have a debt-based currency in which new dollars are always generated with an equivalent amount of debt and then also interest added onto that debt. So every $1 that gets produced in our debt-based currency system comes with $1 plus X worth of the debt attached to it. And so the only way to pay off the debt that comes attached with a round of dollar creation is to create more dollars that also come attached with debt today to pay off the debt that we incurred yesterday to create dollars yesterday. So we need to continually be increasing government spending. We need the waste and the abuse and the fraud in order to create the dollars we need to pay back the banks for having created our dollars in the first place. So that's where we're going in the second half of the show. And so I think you're exactly right, Brian, that there's something fishy there's some connection here between the stated goals of Doge make no sense in view of our debt-based monetary system. So what's really going on with Doge? And I feel like this Palantir thing must have something to do with it. I don't have any good reason to think that other than just a gut feeling, but I think you're headed in the right direction here.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, at least Elon Musk is on Twitter talking about the problem of the economic impact of the big beautiful bill and whatnot, and the problems of government spending. Although, as you're saying, the government has to spend, which kind of makes sense. So, I really don't know what to make of it all.
Yeah. So, there is a despite the fact that the news has all forgotten about the excesses of government spending this week and is focused on Iran.
Do you know where's that bill at? Did it get killed by Elon Musk's kerfuffle, or is it just waiting in the wings?
It's in the Senate, and it's in serious danger of coming apart in the Senate. So the bill is in danger. It has passed the House, right? That's where it stands. Yeah. But the Senate is going to have an issue. They got to get all the Republican senators on board, and if even one person, because they've got the Thomas Masseys, they got a few problematic Republican senators. It's two of them. It's Thomas Massey and Rand Paul who are like, we can't really get on board with this bill. Doge saved us $200 billion, and I see you've got $400 billion in tax cuts put in here. So whatever, eat for each shovelful of sand that Doge shovels to scoop us out of our problem. Right, this bill scoops 2 shovelfuls back into the hole. It's just, oh my God.
Well, my optimism from when, Donald got shot there and was doing the fight thing has really tanked. That's for sure. Yeah,
it seemed like some faction, some powerful faction was opposed to Donald's candidacy, which must mean good things for regular people, right? Some powerful faction obviously wanted to eliminate the Donald, and I thought maybe we would see at least some America First things, as mentioned. And instead, we've got nothing. Nothing! No America First. Of course, no serious addressing the ongoing economic disintegration of this country. So it's like it doesn't even seem to matter. Like you say, Brian, it's like whoever gets elected, we're getting the same policies no matter what.
I would just think that like America First would be like a more powerful meme that would like actually do something to hold like our politicians to account. But apparently it does absolutely nothing.
Yeah, they don't have to care at all. The same clowns who like advocated for going into Iraq and going into Afghanistan still get to step in front of the podium and make the case for the next insane war. And we like the news cameras don't. They still show it. I mean, we still let these people have a significant part to play in our discourse for reasons, I mean, that are opaque to the public.
Yeah.
Well, all right. Well, Brian, I propose to you now that we take a short break, and when we get back, we'll hear the voice of our favorite stand-up comedian, Mr. Dave Smith himself, and we'll pick apart his opinions when he's not here to defend himself. So that will be very entertaining. Looking forward to it, and we'll do it all in the second half. And we're back. All right, so as promised in the first half, Brian, we are going to devote the second half once again this week to the problem of monetary theory and monetary policy. I've got some clips. I got 4 clips from our main man, Dave Smith, on a recent edition of his Part of the Problem podcast, and we'll get to playing them pretty quickly here, but I just want our audience to notice that Dave Smith is going to carefully outline here the 3 ways in which governments can affect your life with spending. You know, he's going to talk about taxes, borrowing, and money printing as if these are 3 distinct options, right? But just appreciate here that what we have is a giant economy, and we need to maintain a steady ratio of dollars that measure the economy to the actual size of the economy itself, right? If the economy expands and you still have the same amount of dollars, you'll have a deflation. And if the economy shrinks and you have the same amount of dollars, you'll have an inflation. So the idea here is to keep prices being the ratio of our units of measurement to the value of objects that we exchange, right? The idea is to keep that ratio steady so that the economy can run, so people can effectively compare the prices of things, right? That's the idea of avoiding horrifying inflation or deflation. You can't run an economy without steady prices. But just appreciate, Dave Smith is going to get into it here, but just appreciate that that taxing and borrowing are 2 ways to decrease the dollars in circulation, and that money printing is the way to increase dollars in circulation. So the point here is that we don't need the borrowing phase of this clever plan. We don't need 2 ways to pull money out of the economy to keep the number of dollars floating around steady, right? We don't need both taxes and borrowing. We just need taxes. Now, if you are a rich person or a corporation or a bank, right, it's much better for you to have your money borrowed off of you at interest versus just having it confiscated via taxes. So that's why we have this policy. It's wicked good for the rich.
Well, all right, but the money does come into existence by borrowing in the first place, though, right, via the Federal Reserve. Which, I mean, I would agree we don't need, but that is like at the fundamental root of it all is this borrowing, though.
That's a different... yes, there's 2... Yes, what you're saying is true, right? But we can print the money, right? We don't have to. When you're talking about on the spending side, we can print money, right? In order to increase the number of dollars in the economy, we can print money, and to decrease it, we could simply tax, right? So you don't have to borrow, right? The borrowing is unnecessary. We can do the spending without the borrowing. So just
I agree, but we really don't even just print it though. We just borrow it from the Federal Reserve, and that's like how we add money to the money supply, right? So it's what you're saying is true, but just consider this: when you have a debt, right? If you have a debt that's, say, you owe the bank $10,000, you owe the credit card company $10,000, right? As soon as you pay them $10,000, the debt is destroyed, right? So it's really 2 different things. So what you're saying is, yes, it is true that we currently borrow the money, but we could just skip that phase and go right to the spending phase. Yeah, well, that I agree with.
Yeah, yes,
but so I mean, we need to like end the Fed or whatever.
Well, yes,
if we want a stable society anyway, or one that the cost of everything doesn't continually go up.
Yeah. The thing that I always compare the borrowing, right? When we borrow, we are selling debt to rich people, foreign rich people, domestic rich people, and banks, institutional, rich people are the wealthy people who already have money are the ones who are buying these notes. So that's a unnecessary sale, just like the sales of indulgences in the Middle Ages was an unnecessary sale. Right? You just get people to believe in a certain milieu, and then they just accept that this is a necessary purchase without thinking too critically about it. That's what we have here. That's what the Federal Reserve banking regime is. It's a complex way of creating money that benefits the bankers, and people don't really realize the problem with the Federal Reserve because it's hard to explain. So it's a bit opaque, and it's the logic of it is a bit slippery, and so that's why it's a great it's a great scam for the elite classes to run on the younger classes, the lower classes, just like the sales of indulgences was a great scam, for the economic elite of the Middle Ages to run on the flock who had come to believe that the church was their only avenue to God, and so the church essentially set up a monetizable toll booth on that route of access, and you made a ton of money doing that. So yeah. Are we ready for clip number 1?
Sure.
Let's dive right in.
Our federal government has bankrupted the United States of America. They inherited the USA and presided over a bankruptcy. It is so goddamn appalling. And it is not, as some people try to make it, it's not like just a made up thing or just some like accounting numbers. I know there's that's what's been popular on like left TikTok or something like that for many years now. Before TikTok, it was other things, but it would always just be like, oh, it's just a number. We could just erase it and write a new number. Money's fake. Who cares? Who cares about the national debt? But that is bullshit. That is not true. Look, as we've said before on the show many times, and this is something that Elon Musk is he is well aware of this argument because he constantly, I think he was just the other day sharing another Milton Friedman video where he was breaking this down. But the fact is that government spending has enormous consequences on a society. And government spending, and this is the stuff that Milton Friedman was breaking down that Elon Musk has regularly shared. So government spending is the real tax, right? That's the tax, is that government spends money. Now, when government spends money, there are 3 different options that they have, but only 3 of how they're going to pay for that spending, okay? The first obvious one is that they tax you. The second one is that they borrow the money. And the third is that they print the money. This is how government pays for what they spend. Now, let's just go through these one at a time real quick. Okay, when government taxes you, they by force, the threat of violence, take your money and then they spend it, okay? Now, what this does is it essentially removes the money from where it would have been allocated and puts it into people who are connected to government. Now, this might be weapons companies, this might be some solar energy company, this might be some health insurance company, whatever it might be. They take the money out of the productive economy and give it to their cronies. Now, me personally, okay, and this is just one small example in a country of hundreds of millions of people, but I pay about half of what I make every year in taxes. I would make double if I wasn't forced to pay taxes. There is simply, look, there's just no question about it that if you were to abolish my taxes, which would instantly double my income, what I would pay Rob more money, I would pay Natalie more money, and I would certainly hire at least 1 or 2 other people. There's just no question about that. That it's what would happen. If you were to just double my productivity, I would be able to pay more to the people who work for me, and I would be able to hire more people who work for me. So there is an enormous burden that taxation puts on the regular productive economy. Because this is not just, again, I'm just one example, and I don't even really, I run a very small business. If you were to now, do this for every single business owner in America, if they were to get huge tax relief, would be able to pay their people more and hire more people. It is a tremendous cost to the economy, the productive economy, that we have to pay such high taxes. That's taxing.
All right. So Dave doesn't love taxes. Well, understood. But the way he's speaking here is as if he's totally stuck within a paradigm. It'd be like if Dave Smith was discussing the affordability of the price that the Roman Catholic Church was charging for the remission of sin, right? It's like, okay, I see it's not that what you're saying doesn't make sense, but you're locked in a paradigm here. I mean, these words actually, Dave Smith is one of the best political commentators I know. The man is brilliant, but he hasn't been able to overcome the brainwashing that we've all been subjected to. These words actually tumble out of his mouth. They take your money and then spend it, right? Talking about taxes, right? I mean, it's like, my God, dude, you do realize that in order for the government to collect back $1 in taxes, right, they first have to seed the economy with a bunch of money first, right? You cannot collect any money in taxes until you first spend some money. And he's got his cart in front of his horse, and if he thought about it for 5 seconds, it'd be obvious, right? It's clearly the government isn't going to be able to tax back any U.S. dollars. It has to first spend them into existence, right? And so when you think of money creation that way, it becomes immediately obvious that the thing he's calling the national debt, is really the number of dollars still in circulation, right? If the government spends $1 million into circulation and then they tax $1 million back out of circulation, there will be no dollars left for the private sector to do business with, right? You must have a deficit if you have a debt-based monetary system. You must run a deficit. You can never not have a deficit. If you balance the budget, you have a disaster because you're taking too many dollars out of the economy with a balanced budget. We blew up our economy in 1921 and in 2000 because of just that. The U.S. government dramatically dropped its spending up after World War I. It kept on taxing. They wanted to get back to a balanced budget. They thought that was responsible. But so many dollars were removed from circulation that people literally didn't have the dollars they needed to pay their bills and keep consuming apace. And so you had this wild stock market crash. It was even bigger than the 29 crash in 1921. Of course, the economy came back from that pretty quickly. In 1929, you had the Dust Bowl, and you had the collapse of a credit bubble in 1929. It's a totally different story than just not enough dollars floating around the economy to actually do business, which was the case in 21. In 1929, you had a credit bubble that collapsed, and then, of course, you had the Dust Bowl on top of that, leading to a depression that, it still rings in the minds of some of the old-timers that are still around these days.
Well, it sounds like you're saying that the outsized national debt isn't a problem.
Well, that's I'm not saying it is a problem because we have reckoned it as a debt. Now we owe so much interest on that debt that it's more than the defense spending. So we're going to pay $1 trillion in interest costs on the debt. It wouldn't be a problem if it weren't for the debt. You could just keep. Obviously, the bigger the economy gets, the more dollars it's going to need. So obviously, you would expect the deficit to tick up over time if you're using a debt-based currency. But the problem is that we are paying for this deficit, right? We could have just confiscated this money off the rich, but instead we borrowed it off of them, and now we have to pay them back, and we're paying them back $1 trillion in 2025, and the defense budget is $700 billion. It's like, oh my God, we are reaching a point where we will not, in order to pay, the interest, because of the laws of compound interest, that interest amount is going to keep going up and up and up until it really does bankrupt the country.
Well, but so the government spending kind of is a problem insofar as the plan is to borrow more money from rich people to enable government spending on defense programs that are of questionable value, right?
Yeah. Yes. The national debt, because it's been reckoned as a debt when it could just be a count of the dollars in circulation that we don't know interest on, it could just be that. But because it's debt, it's a countdown clock to Armageddon. We are hurtling towards the moment when we're going to have to say to the rich people, sorry, we cannot give you all of our money. We cannot have our entire economy be about paying you back for our money. We can just have our own money. We can print our own money, just like Lincoln printed his own money to pay for the Civil War and didn't borrow it from the usurious Rothschild banks of Europe. So that's really, so it's just, it's not, again, Dave Smith used the word made up numbers to talk about, he said that his thing was lefties to say that the number is made up. It's not so much, it is made up. It's not so much that it's made up. It's just that the number shouldn't be a debt. It should just be the number of dollars we put into circulation. And that's why I like the analogy of running out of inches on the job site. An analogy, Brian, you have definitely said that you have come to despise.
It makes me cringe.
But it's a great analogy because it shows how units of measurement, how the limitations, how artificial using a precious metal as a unit of measurement is. And it also shows how arbitrary using debt instead of precious metal is. We could use any number of schemes to decide how many dollars should be in circulation. Obviously, in the 3rd century BC, if you're Alexander the Great, you don't have a National Bureau of Economic Statistics that can help you figure out, what your monetary policy should be. So, using a precious metal makes sense because there's a natural constraint. You can't just spend on precious metals. But
well, I just feel like you're not quite. Like, you're kind of passing by Dave Smith here in some way, or it's just because the spending is a problem insofar as the plan is to, like, borrow from rich people to accommodate this spending.
Right. The federal debt is a problem, because we have a debt-based currency. What we need to do is abolish the debt-based currency. The solution is not to balance the budget. That will destroy the economy. Right? You cannot balance the budget when you have a debt-based currency. You need constantly expanding deficits to have a debt base. The amount of currency needs to gradually expand over time. That's the problem with using a precious metal for your currency. There's no way you just lose that tool in your toolbox of fine-tuning your money supply to the size of your actual economy. You're just stuck with whatever precious metals are available. So I'm just saying there's much better ways that we could be doing our money creation. The one we have now, it creates.
Well, Dave Smith would agree with you, though, that he wants to end the Fed also.
Yeah. Yes. The libertarians are great when it comes to ending the Fed, but they're terrible when it comes to pricing. They have this, the whole thing of the libertarian model. They have a great critique of the banks, but they are missing the critique. They're missing the piece of this where your employer is ripping you off. If you're employed by somebody, right, they're obviously scalping your labor like one of those urchins would scalp Bruins tickets out in front of TD Garden, right? They're just reselling your labor for a higher value. That observation, the libertarians deny with their objective pricing, their relative. What do they call it? The thing that I mentioned earlier, where if you're really, really thirsty, you'll pay $10,000 for a bottle of water, right? Your prices are subjective price theory. I'm forgetting the word, but it's something like that.
Well, so I'd say that Dave Smith's critique is based on what he wants to see happen, like once the Fed is ended.
Well, he wants to balance the budget, right?
Yeah, so like once the Fed goes away, he'd like to have a balanced budget, right? And I don't know, obviously the amount of money in circulation or debt or whatever you want to call it needs to kind of match the economic output so as a way to be sustainable if you want a not cancerous tumor of a society, right? Yeah. So I don't know. It does seem like splitting hairs a bit. Although, obviously the idea that we need to borrow from the rich is crazy. Yeah. Yeah. And I think Dave Smith would agree with that.
Yeah, but he would also say the solution to that problem is to balance the budget. But we'd never want to balance. Even if you didn't have a debt-based currency, you wouldn't want to balance budget, right? The U.S. government is not a household. It doesn't work that way. They have a money printer.
But see, it seems like there's some equivocating over a balanced budget, because I just can't imagine that Dave Smith would have a problem with a budget that was in line with the actual GDP of the American economy, right? That would be. I think you would probably consider that balanced.
It's not you wouldn't balance the budget. You would balance the money supply with respect to GDP, right?
All right. Well, it sounds like splitting hairs.
So you don't want. We need more dollars coming out of Washington than flowing into Washington, right? It does us no good if the government collects our money and doesn't give it back, right? That's useless. What we need is for them to provide useful services like building bridges, maintaining roads, things like that, providing national defense. There are certain. We need them. The core function that we need from the central government is to create a currency, right? Dave Smith is a libertarian. His thing is that the free market is what is going to solve all of our problems for us, that the free market is better. But there are two critical prerequisites to the free market. One, you need to have a fungible currency, right? That's how the market for pharmaceuticals and the market for scrap iron gets combined together into an economy, right? You have a fungible currency that unites those two commodity markets into one broader market, the economy. So you need to have a fungible currency, one, and then critically, if you expect the free market mechanism to work, you also must have monopoly enforcement, right? The minute you don't have competition is the minute that there's no competition between prices. It just becomes an extraction. You can just charge whatever you want. People have to buy it, and then they just, so like if you only have Spectrum as the only company that does the internet in your entire building, you're stuck paying whatever price Spectrum wants to extract from you, versus if they had a couple competitors, you could compare prices and they would be forced to lower their price they would be forced to compete on who could take the smallest profit to provide you internet service, right? So Dave Smith does not think that the federal government has a role in monetary creation or in monopoly enforcement. He thinks that the free market can solve all of our problems. But I think at the very least, you need in order to have the free market, you're going to need at least have monopoly enforcement and currency provision. And so if the government is providing currencies not with a debt-based currency, it means that the national debt wouldn't be a debt, but you would never want a balanced budget in Washington. Again, it doesn't do us any good to have them take our money and just tax our money away, right? And provide, we don't want the government like profiting, right? We want them running a deficit. We just don't want to pay interest on that deficit. I don't know how else to say it other than that the dollars flowing out of Washington needs to be more than the dollars flowing into Washington, so that we can all have our free market, so we can all enjoy the private sector of the economy with the dollars provided by the governmental sector. I forget what the question was now, Brian. I'm making points and forgetting what points I'm making them in response to. But Dave Smith thinks that his solution to all this is going to be the free market and have the federal government, run a balanced budget and not run a deficit, run a surplus. But a surplus destroys the economy, right? So we need the government to run at a deficit, and we also need that deficit to not be racking up interest charges to the rich. Yeah, that's that. I think with that, are we ready to move on to clip number 2?
Sure.
Okay, let's do it.
Number 2 is borrowing the money. And this is where a bill like this that adds to the debt, this is where the borrowing has gotten so crazy that we're now, just into goofy numbers, tens of trillions of dollars that we owe. And this is a commitment that future taxpayers will have to pay back. So this is a commitment that we will continue to starve the real productive economy in the future to pay off for the nonsense consumption that our government borrowed to spend. And then, of course, if you think the debt's bad, well, understand, or if you think you're paying too much in taxes, or if the national debt sure does look like a scary number, just keep in mind that that's not nearly enough. Government spending is so out of control that they simply cannot tax us enough or borrow enough in order to keep spending at these levels. Because there is the thing about taxation is it is a bit of a balance. You can only tax so much before people just stop working as much or just close down businesses they otherwise would have started. I mean, if you want to just reductio absurdum this, right? Like if you were to say that you were going to tax me 100%, right? So if you were to tax me every single dollar I make, I owe to the government. I keep none of it for myself. 100% tax rates on all income levels. Well, then obviously anyone here can see there is now zero incentive to work. Right? There's no reason to work because you don't get any of it. Why the hell would I work if I didn't get any of the money? Okay, I kind of like what I do, but like for most people, there's no zero. Okay, well that's the reductio absurdum, but still at 99%, 98%, 97%, it's still pretty almost no incentive to work. So you can't just tax to infinity. Eventually, people will just stop producing because there's no incentive to. So they can only tax so much. There are limits on borrowing because eventually people don't want to lend you money, whether it's individuals or foreign countries. They have to choose to lend you the money, and you can only find so many people who will lend you money. So there's limits on that.
Well, you must be simpatico with Dave Smith, broadly speaking, with his feelings on borrowing, huh?
Yep. We should not be borrowing a single dollar from anyone. We could... Yeah, we there is no instance where we need to borrow. We could just tax instead. I love Smith's thing. Yeah. If you did 100% tax rates, of course, if you take everyone's profit, they're not going to have any incentive to work. But obviously, 0% tax rate problem also, right? You like taxing is a critical tool for removing money from the economy where it's pooling up uselessly, right? Namely in the savings of the ultra wealthy. What you want to do is, it's like the economy is like a great Plinko game, where you drop the ball and you have a board of pegs and you drop the ball on the top and it takes a random route and lands in any one of a number of slots in the bottom.
No whammies.
No whammies, yes. So like that, you want to seed the economy with money where it's needed, where there's not enough money, where you would like to have people spending. And then you tax money away where it's pooling uselessly, right? If the money is just sitting in someone's bank account generating interest, well, that's not useful for the productive economy. We want money to be changing hands for goods and services. Obviously, you want to allow people a reasonable amount of savings and a reasonable amount of investment. But when you have hundreds of bills, when you have like Bank of America getting paid to exist, right? They get a tax refund. It's like, all right, we're not using the tax system as effectively as we could be here. But yes, Brian, to your point, I'm quite simpatico with Mr. Smith here. There is no reason to do any borrowing ever. We do not need to borrow money when we have the tax hammer to bring down on the ultra wealthy. I think with that we can move on to clip number 3.
Money printing, on the other hand, you're not even limited at this point by the trees you can cut down. Because, most of the money printing at this point is not even actually printed. It's just zeros on a computer. The Federal Reserve just sends them over to JP Morgan Chase. It's nothing. It's as many zeros as you can type. That's what you're limited to. And so that is the preferred, or one of the preferred methods of how governments maintain this level of spending. And this is what has wrecked our society. Not just wrecked our economy, wrecked our society. This is the reason why prices are out of control. It's the reason why young people can't afford to own a home and to send kids to college and to, whatever, all of the things that you'd need to do. If you think about it, there is absolutely no reason why we should have this affordability crisis. This is something that I think is lost on a lot of people, because if you don't spend time thinking about this, it's very easy to just take it for granted. And especially since we've lived in an inflationary economy for, 112 years or whatever it's been, since 1913, when the Federal Reserve was created. And it becomes this thing where almost everybody, just like regular people who aren't even paying attention to politics at all, you just, as I once did too, you just take it for granted. It's almost like a given that prices rise over time. That's what they do, right? Prices go up. I mean, your grandma will have some story about how a bottle of Coke used to cost a nickel. And you're like, yeah, that same bottle of Coke costs $2.50 now. But like, that's what prices do. They go up. They go from being a nickel to being $2.50. But that's not organic. That is not, there's no law of nature that says that prices just go up, that things just get more expensive. That's not like written into stone anywhere. And in fact, the natural order of a productive economy is for prices to fall. Now, people don't know this, but in 1913, if you were talking to your grandma, she would have been telling you how expensive something was to buy back in her day and how much cheaper it is to buy today, because we didn't live in an inflationary economy. We lived in a productive economy. And when you live in a productive economy, prices tend to fall. It's the natural path, because you get better at producing things and therefore you can produce them more efficiently, and therefore you don't have to charge as much for them.
Okay, lots to pick apart there. In broad agreement with Mr. Smith and that clip too, Brian, but with the following caveats. First of all, you'll note he's noticing that the price of goods, he's talking about the paradigm of the Industrial Revolution, of course. So just talking about the Industrial Revolution, he's talking about the tendency of prices to fall over time. I mean, look, Smith would love Karl Marx's volumes 2 and 3 of Capital, published posthumously after Mr. Marx's death in 1892, where he basically talks about that falling prices and the tendency of profit to fall, like falling rate of profit is what Marx got. Volumes 2 and 3 of Capital are really about. Now, volume 1 is the classic technological Marxian apocalypse, where technology obviates the role of workers in the economy to the point where they can no longer negotiate for wages high enough to live on. That's Capital Volume 1, and then Capital Volume 2 and 3 are essentially cost accounting measures, talking about how if your firm doesn't hire any people at all and is just machines, well, now you have a problem, and you have a competitive economy. Now you have a problem of, like, if you run Gillette and, like, let's say, and I run Colgate, right, and we make similar products, but they're all made by machines, right? There's no workers for me to exploit anymore. It's just machines and maintenance, and you have just machines and maintenance. Well, we're just looking at you're just talking about getting to the rock bottom amount of goods and services. and then prices, then you have, it's really hard to make a profit when you're in such a saturated competitive market, and the falling rate of profit will create a financial apocalypse. So Marx had two prophecies of doom: one about technology obviating workers, and the other one about what happens to finance in a context where the rate of profit tends to fall. So it's interesting to hear Dave Smith dance all around, the Marxian ideas, but never really take them on board. He just hasn't been exposed to them, I think, because we live in America and we don't talk about the class war here. You can also hear him talk about creating how it's just like it's as many zeros as you can type on your keyboard is how many dollars you're limited to. It's part of the point of the parable of the inches on the job site, right? These are units of measurement. We're no more limited in the amount of dollars we can have than the amount of inches that you need to measure up a new dining room table or some cabinets or whatever. And then the last point he made there is about the government spending wrecking society. It's why young people can't afford a home, right? How would that even work? Like, how is it that the real reason that young people can't afford a home is because we do not tax the wealthy. Think about this. Like, what would the home prices going up to $500,000 to $1 million? That's what the demolition of the middle class looks like. Picture this: if we had a tax regime that was confiscatory on the wealthy, that punished the wealthy, like if you start to get up to where you have, if you start to get rich enough to get a second home, then that's when the taxes really set in. What you would see if you installed such a tax regime was that the riches, all the extra money the rich have that's sloshing around in their bank accounts from our very friendly tax regime towards them, all that extra money goes into buying up extra assets, things like stocks or real estate, and that's what causes the price to appreciate. If you install the tax regime like I just described, where you hammer the wealthy, what you would see is them start to have to sell their, like, imagine if you pass a law saying that you putting heavy taxes on a second home, right? What you would see is a whole bunch of those second homes go on the market at once, and you would see the exact opposite of the destruction of the middle class with $500,000 homes. You'd see the prices come down, right? You would force a asset fire sale, in other words, if you tax the wealthy, and that would fix the asset inflation problem that we've been dealing with since we switched our economy over to a super friendly tax regime to the rich during the Reagan administration. Like the 1980s is the famous time when, housing, real estate prices really started to take off. So it's interesting to hear Dave Smith think that it's government spending that's causing housing prices to be $1 million. It's not government spending, dude. It's like it's the fact that we don't tax our rich people. That's what's going on here. So that's my theory. I'd be open to a counter argument if you got one, Brian. But I think I'm exactly right. I don't think there is such a counter argument.
Well, man, I don't know. Well, I'm sure that Dave Smith would not disagree too much with what you're saying.
Yeah.
I mean, to some extent, your dispute with Dave Smith, it'd be like Chris Hitchens, the great Chris Hitchens, the famous atheist and cunning guy in general. But anyway, he would get into sometimes he'd have a debate with someone who, he would debate people about the existence of God. And their version of God would be not one that needed us to blow stuff up in the Middle East or, convert the gays or something. He would just be some all-loving dude who maybe represented truth or something. He'd be like, well, we really don't have a lot to argue about here. He doesn't really care. And so similar, I think if you got into an argument with Dave Smith, I think he would agree with the things that you're saying, basically.
Do you think he would agree that the free market is entirely dependent on monetary policy and on monopoly enforcement?
I don't know.
Well, if he did, then I would be like, well, dude, why are you calling yourself a libertarian then? Why? Obviously, your paramount value is not shrinking the size of government. Your paramount value is the maintenance of society in general. And you have this rubric of smaller government is always better, but it's just not really true in cases where you decide that bigger government is better for society. You go right with bigger government. So the size of government for these libertarians seems to be value number 4 or 5 on their list of values, not number 1 or 2. And so I don't understand. It seems like libertarian ideas are really useful when it comes, we hear a lot from the libertarian think tanks when it comes time to slash social spending. But when it comes time to cut taxes on the wealthy, you will not hear Dave Smith argue against that. He thinks that all taxes are bad. And my argument here would be well, taxes on the wealthy are the things that we're missing. It's how the middle class is being destroyed. So I don't know. I feel like I have fundamental orthogonal opposite opinions to Dave Smith. Now we both want to maintain society better than it is currently being cared for, and we both point to some of the same. We both know what makes a better society. We both have a good feeling for what's a strong society and what's a weak society. The question is, how do you get there? And that's where these disagreements over political theory arise.
I guess it'd be interesting to hear what Dave Smith has to say about like whether lowering these taxes on the rich is like net benefit or net harm.
Yeah, he would argue that it's a net harm because it's an act of violence and you're confiscating people's wealth. And I'm like, okay.
Well, he might, but he must see. He must think that there's some kind of issue. I don't know, like, because I mean, he does like argue the boots on the ground reality of things, like with this recent immigration debate and whatnot.
Yeah, it gets him away from libertarian principles. Obviously, he's a big advocate for immigration enforcement. And so it's like, okay, so here's a libertarian arguing that it actually makes libertarian sense for the government to come around with guns, collect all of our money, use that money to hire an army, and then use that army to patrol the southern border. You know, like, that's an anti-libertarian position. But obviously, no patrol of the southern border is a complete disaster. And it's total. You don't really have a country in the Westphalian sense if you don't have borders. So it's like, yeah. So I just think that I just feel like I'm 180 degrees on the opposite side of the positions here for Mr. Smith, even though we all want the same things eventually.
Yeah, well, people's like political philosophies are like growing like less important, and like the way people vote tends to be based on what they believe. And so I don't know if you believe that society's run by like our reptilian overlords or whatnot, and you tend to vote for the Donald. And then if you, I don't know, don't go down those crazy rabbit holes, you tend to vote for an establishment shill, right?
Yeah, I think if you put faith in, and look, I mean, it's if you don't believe like the state newspapers and like the news apparatus, if you like don't believe the things that are told to you by very sober people in suits on the TV, you're stuck out making your own beliefs. So there is a risk to not believing the propaganda streams and going your own way and forming your own opinions. So I can understand wanting to just believe in just to believe in the elements of our. Believe in the propaganda aspects of our society, because you'll end up it is risky either believing the establishment or disbelieving the establishment. Well, they both come with their own pitfalls. That's what I'm trying to say here. I think I got all my points out about clip number 3, Brian. I think we are ready for clip number 4. Take it away.
If the job were, say, like to make a man-made lake, and I had to do it with men with shovels, I'm going to have to charge you a lot more than if I were to do it with an excavator. If I have the machinery and the technology, one man can now do the work of like 100 men. It's just much cheaper to produce things. You can charge less for them. But we don't live in that world because we live in this world of insane government spending, and they can't tax us enough and they can't borrow enough. So they have to print up the money. And when they print up the money, who ends up getting the money first? Because that's what the whole game is about when you print new money, right? Theoretically, if you were to print money and evenly distribute it along the lines of how people already have money. So like if you were to double the money supply, but just give it out, double everybody's individual net worth, then you're not going to have a huge transfer of wealth. It should be more or less around the same, but that's not how it works. Who gets the money first? When you print all this new money, who gets it first? Well, it's government's cronies and Wall Street, but I repeat myself. And this is where someone like Bernie Sanders can come in with whatever his numbers exactly are, whether they're exactly accurate or not, but where he says, of the new wealth that's created, 99% of it went to the top 1% of millionaires and billionaires. Well, he's not completely wrong about that. He doesn't understand who the real culprit is here. He always just thinks it's greed and corporations, but that's not actually true. It's a government banking apparatus that is specifically designed to print money and give the new money to their friends first. Because, of course, when new money is printed, the prices don't immediately rise. It takes time for the money to get into the economy. That drives upward pressure on prices. And so if you get the new money immediately, you buy stuff at the price that it used to be, and then you sell it at the new artificially increased price.
Okay, so Smith is saying there that that this is that the Federal Reserve System is graft, right? But it's like, and he's right. He's not wrong. He's correct. We have an inflationary monetary policy, and the folks that get the money first benefit from it to some degree, for sure. That definitely contributes to wealth inequality. But I don't think that housing prices are $500,000 nearby in Cape Elizabeth, Maine, because like Austin Goolsbee and his band of merry pirates, the Minneapolis Fed, get their hands on printed money first, right? There's many aspects in the society that cause the rich to get richer faster than the rest of us. One of those is compound interest, right? If you have money, then you get paid for having money. Whereas if you don't have money, or you're in debt, right, you don't have that tailwind behind you. The other one is the classic financial exploitation that goes on in the workplace, right? Your employer is fencing your labor. We already said it, right? Your employer is reselling your labor for a profit, right? And so that you go to work and you create X dollars worth of value, and then your employer pays you X minus Y, and then keeps the Y for himself, or the company keeps the Y for itself, right? That's another way that the rich get richer, by chronically underpaying people. Or your employer even if it's a non-profit, right? They still have overhead. They're still going to pay you less than the economic value you generate, because they have overhead to cover. They have other expenses beyond just your salary. So that aspect, right? The classic Marx Volume 1, Capital Volume 1 aspect, totally lost here. And that leads us into you could just hear Smith describing how technology obviates workers, right? He's like, if I had to have 100 people dig you a lake, well, it'd be expensive. But if I only have one person in a machine, well, I can dig you a lake real cheap. Like, no thought about how the proliferation of technology will affect an economy built like that, right? The solution is, rather than having one person who owns a huge business, or a board of directors, or private ownership of these huge companies, what you want to do is make them democracies, right? So that way you make that is how you, if you had a democracy, the democracy would make decisions like with new if you have a company that has 100 people that digs lakes, and the company buys a machine that makes it so you only need one person, well, they're not going to fire 99 people and just leave one person employed, right? The 100 people aren't going to vote to do that. What they're going to vote to do is to divide the workday by 100, so you only have to work 100, as much as you did before, right? That is how you fix the problem of exploitation built into the capitalist structure of our businesses, but with a little bit of democracy, right? We've been taught to extol the virtues of democracy in all departments of our life, except for the one department where all of us adults spend all of our waking hours, and that is the workplace. And there at the workplace, we don't demand democracy. We submit to top-down autocracy, and that top-down autocracy gives rise to a maldistribution of the wealth generated by our businesses. And that leads, so it's like there's the craft and corruption in Washington, D.C. There's the compound interest on wealth. There's the exploitative capitalist relationship we all have with our employers at work. All of these things serve to pool up wealth in the coffers of the rich, while the poor end of the economy suffers more and more and more, to where we have homeless people lying around visibly in the streets. So that is what I think of Mr. Smith's breakdown of the monetary system. I mean, it's like you say, we agree on where we want the train to eventually end up, but we have a very serious disagreement about which set of tracks is most appropriate to lead us there.
Well, my main critique of what Mr. Smith just said there is that his Bernie Sanders impression sounds more like Dracula than like Bernie Sanders. And
he was saying Bernie Sanders is some kook for saying that that it's greed and corruption or whatever it is. But like, we just listed a whole bunch of ways in which the wealth get wealthier. So Bernie Sanders is right. But carry on, Brian. And he did sound like Dracula.
Yeah, he needs to work on that. But I think the kind of solution to our problem is to buy Bitcoin, man. That's the kind of solution that will change the status quo, I think.
Hang on a second. I'm telling you that our monetary system causes asset inflation by maldistribution of wealth, and you're telling me that the solution is to buy one of these assets that's being inflated by maldistribution of wealth?
Yeah. Well, it undermines that's the sort of idea or thing that's gonna undermine the ownership's class attempt to fleece you for all you're worth, because there's just nothing that they can do seemingly about this Bitcoin problem.
Yeah. You're right. I like that the Bitcoin problem removes the central banks from the equation. That's awesome. But It does also have an artificial limit on the number of tokens or units of measurement that we can create. Right? There's only so many Bitcoins that can exist. So I don't think it's a perfect replacement, a perfect monetary system. But boy, it sure is better that it's not controlled by the authorities, or at least I think so. They say that 95% of all Bitcoins are owned by a couple whales or something like that. So that's a concern. But other than that, I like what you're saying. Like, I do like that the Bitcoin, it's an end around the Federal Reserve System.
Yeah, the Bitcoin or something like that is a way to counteract. Well, you can accrue value without having to shell out $500,000 for a house.
Yeah.
And I think we'll probably as increasingly as the government does its thing and leeches the value out of society, it should I think it'll counteract it, or I think it's like a political force. I don't know. Until we get to some kind of post-Fed society, I don't know. That's what I would do.
Yeah. Well, we have to continuously print dollars so that we can pay off the debt from yesterday's dollars that we've printed, right? And the Bitcoin puts an end to that horrifying cycle. Or at least it could. So what you would see is the ratio of dollars to Bitcoins, how many dollars equals one Bitcoin in our measurements. You would just see the dollars keep going up and up and up the more we print. Because we have to print money not just to get more money tomorrow, but we also have to pay off the interest of yesterday. So the amount of money we're printing is going up exponentially, but the number of Bitcoins remains the same. So I would expect to see the ratio of dollars to Bitcoins just spin crazily until the end of time, or until the logic of our monetary system finally collapses on itself.
The System Failure Podcast is not financial advice.
Yes, absolutely not. Well, one final thing to talk about here, Brian, before we put a bow on this episode of System Failure, is just this idea of, on the one hand, the two Marxian prophecies, right? On the one hand, you have a financial apocalypse from our debt-based currency, and on the other hand, you have the problem of technology obviating workers and making it so fewer and fewer and fewer workers are needed every year for the production process. There's a connection there. It's like the fewer workers are needed, the harder time it is that the fewer remaining workers are going to have negotiating for higher wages, right? People are going to be desperate. The population is growing, but the number of jobs needed is shrinking, and so people are going to be more and more desperate for jobs as time goes on. And the more desperate people are for jobs, the more likely they are to accept a lower salary. And so we're just talking about the basic laws of supply and demand of the labor market. Technology collapses the demand for labor. Well, the supply keeps ticking up a pace. It's not a good sign for those of us who have to negotiate our salary from some capitalist business owner, right? It's not a good look. And what happens when your lower class is chronically underpaid and your upper class is doing better, not just through by owning businesses, but also through asset price inflation, also through corruption, and also through compound interest? What happens is the great Marxian prophecy is that ultimately the people who do the work need to also buy the products they're producing. And the idea is that as capitalists fire their labor forces en masse and replace them with technology, fewer and fewer people will be able to buy the products that are a result of the production process, right? And what's really happening when capitalists are firing their labor force because they get a great new machine that can dig a lake where it used to take 100 guys, now it just takes one. That's great news for the capitalist. He can fire 99% of his workers and give himself a hefty raise. But what's really happening is that all these individual capitalists are obliviating each other's market for their goods and services, right? The 99 people they fired are going to buy fewer groceries and fewer cars and fewer tickets to the Bruins, what have you. It has economic implications. Well, what happens, the way that we have kept our society afloat since the aforementioned 1980s, since Reagan came in and flipped the tax code on its head and started, the idea was, this is the neoliberal project, right? The idea is we're going to cut tax raises on the wealthy, and it's going to benefit everyone through some trickle-down process, which never materializes. Well, debt is the solution to keeping the system running, right? In the 1980s, at the same time as Reagan, you had the rise of the shopping malls and the credit cards and the plunging of our society into debt. So that is the connection between debt and labor exploitation. And debt, that is why it's always the debt apocalypse that comes for societies like Rome that use that's the connection between debt and the sanctity of debt and the mass exploitation of the working class. So I just wanted to bring those two halves of the walnut there together, because we talk about, the Federal Reserve and borrowing money and 10-year T-notes on the one hand, and then we talk about technological apocalypse as observed by Mr. Karl Marx on the other. And I just wanted to create that little tether between the two ideas, because they are, you tug on one end of that string and you get, it tugs on the other. All right. Well, I think I'm spent here, Brian. So I suppose that what I should do now is invite all of our listeners to log on to systemfailure.org. At systemfailure.org, you can sign up for the weekly essays that I write. If you sign up with your email address, then they will arrive in your email inbox every single Sunday morning, and you won't ever have to worry about missing one. And if you'd like to get in contact with Brian or me, or send us a note, or let us know what we're missing in these critiques of the economic system, well, you can accomplish that over on the About page, also at systemfailure.org. Well, alrighty, folks, we'll wish you all a fantastic week indeed. We'll see you all back here for the next exciting episode of System Failure.
All right.